Great news! I'm in a new house. Bad news, I have no internet until Friday. But what I do have is my wife's laptop, an iPhone, 150GB of Vodafone 5G, and a place to go and upload stuff. So it's not all bad, all things considered. So the next few videos might just end up being discussion pieces, the sort of thing where I say things, voice an opinion, and then you chat about it in the comment section. Or maybe even do a couple of list videos, which I know I've said I hate, but needs must. For this one, this sort of follows on from a couple of earlier pieces I've done involving certain drivers from a certain generation of said drivers. And the idea for this video came off the back of a few YouTube shorts that have been thrown my way in recent days. These YouTube shorts being clips from a podcast hosted by David Coulthard and Eddie Jordan, which got me thinking, was David Coulthard as bad as people say online? And actually, as I type in David Coulthard was underrated into Google, the first thing that pops up is an Autosport article from 1999 called David Coulthard overrated and underperformed. Might have to keep that one open for this. I want to avoid just doing a reaction video based around that article though. But I guess part of it stems from the fact that DC got his break from the unfortunate and untimely death of Ayrton Senna in the May of 1994. Promoted up to the second seat in the Williams due in part to Nigel Mansell still being over in America doing the kart championship, which if you're not clued up on stuff translates to IndyCar. So he was thrust into the second seat of a team reeling from the death of one of the greats, in a car he's only driven as a test driver, and making the jump from Formula 3000 to Formula 1 mid-season. Benefit of the doubt would be something you can give to him since it's a bit of a quick turnaround, and actually saying that, his junior single seat results are pretty... He qualified in 8th for that first race in Barcelona and was set to score a point before his Renault engine expired. But then at the British Grand Prix, he qualified 7th, got sent to the back of the grid because his car stalled on the formation lap and worked his way back up to 5th. Alright, he was a lap behind Damon, but still, it was telling that the guy had the pace required to do the job if necessary. Into 1995 though, he did suffer from some poor form and was initially disqualified from the Brazilian Grand Prix along with Schumacher, but both were reinstated. And actually, poor form isn't really a fair term to use, given that his early season was hampered by retirements, not by just being bad. But when the car worked, he was only off the podium once all season, including the first win for him at the Portuguese Grand Prix, although all of that was undone by the embarrassing crash into the Adelaide pit wall. So on to pastures new for 1996. He joined McLaren in their second season with Mercedes engines and was there alongside Mika Hakkinen, who himself was back in the car only a few months after almost perishing in that McLaren at Adelaide at the end of the previous season. But that season didn't start well. He had a stuck throttle in Melbourne, spun off at the wet-dry Brazilian Grand Prix and was out of the points in Argentina. But at the 5th round, the San Marino Grand Prix, he got a flyer of a start and was leading the race until his hydraulics went, a race that was dominated by Hill's Williams and Schumacher's Ferrari. He was also close to winning the Monaco Grand Prix and might have actually done it if the race went just a lap or so longer, given that Panis barely had enough fuel in the car to do the post-race checks. At the end of it all, DC would finish the season with 18 points versus Hakkinen's 31, but you do have to factor in the retirements and things. But it does have to be said, when both McLarens finished a Grand Prix, typically Mika was ahead. In 1997 though, Coulthard would win the opening Australian Grand Prix and also win the Italian Grand Prix later that year, meaning he won 2 races in a McLaren before Hakkinen did. Coulthard also beat Hakkinen over the course of that season, finishing 4th overall, later 3rd due to Schumacher's expulsion from the standings, but the results don't tell the full story, as on more than a few occasions Hakkinen would be leading a race but would suffer typical McLaren reliability issues. Hakkinen retired from the lead at Silverstone, the A1 Ring and the Nürburgring, while Coulthard retired from the lead in Canada. Moving into 1998, it seemed that the pecking order at McLaren was well and truly established. Ron Dennis, the then team principal at McLaren, must have seen that Mika was the guy to bring success back to Woking and that Mika would be the team's outright #1 driver. And I think David knew that from both a personal and sporting standpoint that was going to be the case. Ron and Mika were close, especially after that near-fatal accident at Adelaide, and David knew that from a performance standpoint, Mika was just better than him. Also around this point, there was another potential problem standing in the way of success, and that was Michael Schumacher and Ferrari being the other duo that would pick up where McLaren faltered. Something else that turned people to the he won't make it opinion is the gentleman's agreement that DC honoured during the Australian Grand Prix of 1998, where he moved over for Mika because the Finn had been leading into Turn 1. Whoever led into Turn 1 would win the race if it was a 1-2. That was the deal, and DC honoured it. Nice guys don't win championships, as they say. Unless you're Jim Clark or Jenson Button, obviously. As that Autosport article mentions, he'd also taken himself out of contention for decent points at Buenos Aires when he spun himself off fighting Schumacher and also spun off at Silverstone. But his retirement at Monaco was reliability. His retirement at Canada was also reliability. McLaren took too long getting DC'd by Mika when his car started slowing at Hungary to potentially attack the Michael, and then had that howler at Belgium where he caused the 13-car pile-up and had the miscommunication with Schumacher lapping him that resulted in the German ripping off one of his front wheels. It was after that you could see Coulthard settle into his role of the number 2 driver, be Mika's rear gunner, and this was happening while Valtteri Bottas was just getting into karting. Through 1999 and into the 2000s, it was that clear dynamic of Mika being there challenging for the titles and DC being there in support, much like Eddie Irvine and Rubens Barrichello would be. But in 2001, he would finish second in the overall standings, having his best season ever. But he was a long way behind Schumacher, beat the second Ferrari convincingly, and destroyed Mika in a season where you could feel that the injury sustained in that Adelaide crash was starting to catch up with him. In 2002, he beat his new teammate Kimi Raikkonen but would be 5th overall, as Williams and BMW had made strides forward and Juan Pablo Montoya was finding his seat in Formula 1. In 2003, Raikkonen obliterated him, and with Fernando Alonso starting to show himself, the writing was kind of on the wall for DC at a top team. He continued at McLaren until the end of the following season, before moving to a new team, Red Bull. Coulthard was part of the building phase for Red Bull that had ambitions of making it to the top. He was the one that convinced them that they had to hire Adrian Newey as their designer if they wanted to win. So Red Bull hired Adrian Newey, took a little bit of time, but in the early 2010s, they started winning, and now they obviously have what they have now. He had the experience and he was able to bag some decent results, such as Red Bull's first ever podium at the 2006 Monaco Grand Prix. For me, DC was a driver who saw what was in front of him and knew his limits. He was also in the right place but at the wrong time. His teammate was Mika Hakkinen and the other guy was Michael Schumacher. He even admits that he wasn't good enough to be a world champion, but knew what he was good at and used that to the benefit of the team. When the early 2000s rolled around, you'd got Montoya, Raikkonen, Schumacher and the emergence of Alonso to deal with, while Coulthard was he was just another guy on the grid at that point. So overall, DC was mid, but in a good way. He didn't waste his career chasing what was never going to be realistically possible, like Bottas and Perez thinking they were ever going to beat peak Hamilton and Verstappen. He knew his limits and used them for the better of the team, and that relationship between DC and Mika, the dream team of my childhood, is still very close to this day. But it is great to see a driver honest with themselves. Like I said, he admits he didn't have that killer instinct, but he could show that at times. The infamous one-finger salute at Manicuro against the Michael being a prime example. But 13 wins in that time is nothing to be sniffed at. For a rating of overrated or underrated, I'd say, well, underrated might not be the term to apply, but at the same time overrated isn't either. I'd say he's a driver that people never saw the full picture of, because we only ever see the statistics next to the amount of wins and the amount of titles. We see 13 wins and no world titles, while Hakkinen had 20 odd wins and 2 world titles, Schumacher 91 and 7. It's that whole, he had the greatest car but no world title argument. But his teammate was Mika Hakkinen, the other guy was Michael Schumacher. If Hakkinen hadn't had his crash, Coulthard probably wouldn't have had a chance at all. You'd have a hard time competing with that, and then there was the resurgence of Williams, the arrival of Montoya, the emergence of Raikkonen and Alonso, which I've already established. He was an integral part of that McLaren team that was pretty damn good towards the end of the 90s and into the beginning of the 2000s. But I'd like to know what you think. So then, a look at whether David Coulthard was an underrated or overrated driver. A video that's kind of the extension to the why did Fisichella underachieve at top teams video, I guess. If you've been given some food for thought, then do like the video so I know I've made some good points, and for more like this, get subscribed with the bell on so you never miss out. Massive thanks as ever to the kind folk at Patreon for the support, and if you want to help out at a more personal level, there's a link to Patreon in the description, as well as links to Discord, socials and the F1 Store affiliate link. Well, the super thanks if you just want to buy me a coffee or help put some money towards some trinkets for the new home studio. So until next time, I've been Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.